1966 wasn't just any year in Hollywood, it was the year that nearly bankrupted the entire industry. While today we talk about box office bombs that lose hundreds of millions, the financial disasters of '66 were so catastrophic, they literally changed how movies were made forever. What most people don't realize is that these failures occurred at the worst possible moment, right as the studio system was already struggling to survive. The old Hollywood was dying, television was stealing audiences, and executives were desperately throwing money at problems they didn't understand. The result? A perfect storm of financial catastrophe that would make modern flops look like calculated risks. Let's dive into the 13 costliest mistakes that sent studio heads reaching for the bottle and changed the course of cinema history. The first major casualty of '66 was Dr. Doolittle, a film so catastrophically mismanaged that even its star, Rex Harrison, tried to quit multiple times during production. What began as a $6 million project ballooned to over $18 million, equivalent to about $150 million today. After the production team built an entire village in England, only to discover it was unusable due to constant rain. They abandoned it completely and rebuilt in California, wasting millions in the process. Harrison was reportedly so challenging to work with on set that crew members left in droves. When filming moved to the Caribbean island of St. Lucia, the entire cast and crew fell seriously ill from a local virus. The animals used in filming, over 1,200 of them, constantly fought, escaped, or simply refused to perform. One particularly valuable bird worth $10,000, about $85,000 today, flew away during the first day of shooting and was never seen again. When Dr. Doolittle finally limped into theaters, audiences stayed away in droves. 20th Century Fox executives had convinced themselves they had another Sound of Music on their hands. Instead, they had a bloated, charmless mess that would haunt their balance sheets for years. The final damage? The film lost approximately $11 million in 1966 dollars, a financial wound so deep it contributed to studio president Darryl F. Zanuck removing his own son Richard from the company. But if Dr. Doolittle was a disaster, Casino Royale was an absolute catastrophe. What many don't know is that this 1967 release, which began production in '66, started as a serious James Bond adaptation before spiraling into possibly the most chaotic major production in Hollywood history. The troubles began when the producers couldn't secure Sean Connery, who was tied to the official Bond franchise. Their solution? Hire 5 different directors to make essentially 5 different movies, then stitch them together. Peter Sellers and Orson Welles reportedly disliked each other so intensely they refused to be on set at the same time. Sellers eventually left before finishing his scenes, forcing major script rewrites. The production was so disorganized that actors would show up on set not knowing what scenes they were shooting or even what characters they were playing. The budget exploded to $12 million, enormous for 1966. And the resulting film was a disjointed mess that confused critics and audiences alike. Columbia Pictures took a significant financial loss on the project, watching helplessly as their Bond parody was crushed by the release of the actual Bond film You Only Live Twice just 2 months later. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Paramount was dealing with its own expensive headache. Is Paris burning? This World War II epic about the liberation of Paris seemed like a sure thing on paper. Directed by René Clément with a screenplay by Gore Vidal and Francis Ford Coppola, and starring a murderer's row of talent including Orson Welles, Kirk Douglas, and Leslie Caron, what could go wrong? As it turns out, everything. The French government initially supported the production, even allowing the filmmakers to redecorate parts of Paris to look like it was 1944 again. But political tensions soon arose, with President Charles de Gaulle personally intervening in the script to ensure France's role in its own liberation was properly emphasized. These delays cost a fortune. When Is Paris Burning was finally released, American audiences simply didn't show up. The film's artistic decision to shoot mostly in black and white, with only a few color sequences, may have been historically appropriate. Actual footage from the liberation could be seamlessly integrated, but US viewers in 1966 expected color spectacles for their premium ticket prices. The film lost approximately $7 million, and Paramount executives were left wondering how a movie that performed so well in Europe could fail so spectacularly in America. The string of disasters continued with The Bible in the Beginning, directed by John Huston. This massive production aimed to cover the first 22 chapters of Genesis, from creation through Abraham. Producer Dino De Laurentiis envisioned this as the first installment in a series that would eventually cover the entire Bible. Plans that were permanently shelved after the first entry's performance. The production was plagued by its own biblical scale problems. Filming in Italy and Sicily resulted in numerous technical challenges, including trying to wrangle hundreds of animals for the Noah's Ark sequences. The special effects for the creation and flood sequences were cutting edge for the time, but drove the budget to a staggering $18 million. To make matters worse, the film's 3-hour-plus runtime limited the number of daily showings, further hampering its box office potential. While The Bible did manage to earn $15 million in rentals, its enormous cost meant 20th Century Fox still considered it a disappointment, especially given the religious epic genre was already showing signs of audience fatigue. What makes this particularly tragic is that this was the second massive underperformer for Fox in 1966, coming right alongside the Dr. Doolittle disaster, delivering a 1-2 punch that sent the studio into financial tailspin. Not even the reliable star power of Audrey Hepburn and Peter O'Toole could save How to Steal a Million from becoming another 66 casualty. This glamorous heist comedy set in Paris seemed to have everything going for it. Two of Hollywood's biggest stars, direction by William Wyler, gorgeous European locations, and a lighthearted caper plot. Yet, when released, it met with audience indifference. The production itself was troubled by O'Toole's notorious drinking habits, which reportedly caused delays and on-set tension. More significantly, the film found itself caught in a shifting cultural landscape. The sophisticated, elegant European comedy was beginning to feel out of step with the more countercultural sensibilities emerging in 1966. Younger audiences were increasingly drawn to films like Blow Up, that captured the edgier zeitgeist of the era. While not a total financial catastrophe like some others on this list, How to Steal a Million significantly underperformed against its budget and star expectations. For a film featuring two A-listers, its $4.4 million domestic gross was disappointing enough to be considered a high-profile misfire, especially painful for a studio system already on the ropes. Fantastic Voyage represented a different kind of failure, an innovative sci-fi concept that cost too much and arrived slightly too early for audiences to embrace. The film's premise, scientists miniaturized and injected into a human body to perform surgery from the inside, required groundbreaking special effects that pushed the budget to $8 million, a massive sum for a science fiction film in 1966. What's rarely discussed is how the production was plagued by technical challenges that repeatedly delayed filming. The elaborate sets representing the interior of the human body were constantly breaking down, and the complex blue screen work needed for many sequences was cutting edge, but tremendously time-consuming, with some shots taking days to complete. While critically well-received and now considered a classic, Fantastic Voyage earned only about $12 million at the worldwide box office. Given the expensive marketing campaign and high production costs, 20th Century Fox considered it a financial disappointment, especially painful coming alongside their other 1966 misfires. The film would later find its audience through television broadcasts and become influential, but in the immediate term, it represented yet another drain on studio resources during a critically difficult year. Perhaps no film better represents the tragic miscalculations of 1966 than Mr. Buddwing, a psychological drama starring James Garner. MGM had high hopes for this adaptation of Evan Hunter's novel about an amnesiac wandering Manhattan trying to piece together his identity. With a respected director in Delbert Mann and supporting performances from Gene Simmons and Suzanne Pleshette, the studio expected at minimum a modest hit. What they got instead was one of the biggest box office disasters of Garner's career. The film's fragmented narrative style, innovative for its time, confused mainstream audiences, and its bleak existential tone alienated viewers expecting the charming, likable Garner they knew from Maverick. The production itself was challenging, with New York location shooting causing numerous delays and budget overruns. Mr. Buddwing earned a mere $1.9 million against its $3.2 million budget, a devastating result that temporarily damaged Garner's box office reputation and became one of the many financial drains contributing to MGM's declining fortunes. The film has been largely forgotten today, representing the kind of ambitious failure that rarely even gets a proper reassessment. If Hollywood wanted to make a film about its own failure, it couldn't have created a better metaphor than The Oscar. This behind-the-scenes drama about an unscrupulous actor who would do anything to win an Academy Award was meant to be an insider's look at the film industry, Instead, it became an unintentional parody of Hollywood's worst tendencies, overblown, self-important, and ultimately rejected by the very industry it portrayed. The production was cursed from the start. Star Stephen Boyd clashed with director Russell Rouse, and the screenplay underwent countless rewrites as real Hollywood insiders consulted on the project insisted on changes. The film's budget swelled as the producers insisted on lavish sets and authentic Hollywood locations to lend credibility. Upon release, the Oscar was savaged by critics for its overwrought dialogue and melodramatic performances. Actual Academy members were particularly offended by the film's cynical portrayal of the Oscar campaign process. The box office was dismal, with the film earning only about $1.2 million against a $4 million budget. The failure was so complete that it effectively ended Rouse's directing career and became a cautionary tale about Hollywood making films about itself. The group represented a different kind of Hollywood miscalculation. United Artists had high hopes for this adaptation of Mary McCarthy's controversial bestseller about 8 Vassar graduates navigating life, love, and careers in the 1930s. With Sidney Lumet directing and a cast of promising young actresses, including Candice Bergen and Joan Hackett, expectations were high for a prestigious hit. The troubles began during production when Lumet struggled to condense McCarthy's sprawling narrative into a coherent film. The author herself was frequently on set, creating tension with her constant suggestions and criticisms. The film's frank treatment of sensitive topics, including relationships, mental illness, and women's health issues, groundbreaking for 1966, also created marketing challenges, as the studio wasn't sure how to promote such mature content. When released, the group received mixed reviews and failed to find a substantial audience. Its $4.5 million gross against a $5 million budget and significant marketing costs made it a financial disappointment, particularly painful for United Artists, which had positioned the film as a prestige project. The failure of the group served as an early warning that even acclaimed literary adaptations with strong pedigrees were no longer guaranteed successes in the changing Hollywood landscape. Joseph Losey's Modesty Blaise stands as one of the more fascinating failures of 1966. Based on a popular British comic strip, the film was conceived as a stylish, female-led response to the James Bond phenomenon, with Monica Vitti in the lead role, Terence Stamp as her sidekick, and Dirk Bogarde as the villain. The film had a fashionable European art house pedigree that executives hoped would elevate it above typical spy fare. What went wrong? The production was chaotic from the start. The screenplay went through numerous writers, including novelist Evan Jones and playwright Harold Pinter, resulting in a tonally inconsistent mess that couldn't decide if it was a straight action film, a parody, or an art film. Losey and Vitti reportedly clashed throughout filming, with the Italian actress struggling with her English dialogue. The film's mod visual style and experimental structure, innovative for the time, confused mainstream audiences expecting straightforward spy thrills. Modesty Blaise earned only about $2 million worldwide against its $3 million budget, killing any hopes for the franchise 20th Century Fox had envisioned. The film has since gained a cult following for its audacious style, but in 1966, it represented yet another financial wound for an already bleeding studio system. The Singing Nun, starring Debbie Reynolds, seemed like a safe bet for MGM, a wholesome, family-friendly musical based on the true story of Janine Deckers, a Belgian nun whose song Dominique became an unlikely international hit. The studio expected a heartwarming crowd-pleaser in the vein of The Sound of Music. The production was troubled from the start when the real Singing Nun objected to how her story was being portrayed, creating negative publicity. Director Henry Koster struggled with a screenplay that took enormous liberties with Decker's life story, transforming her complex reality into a sanitized Hollywood fable. Reynolds herself was reportedly unhappy with the material, but contractually obligated to complete the film. Upon release, The Singing Nun was dismissed by critics as saccharine and inauthentic. More damningly, audiences stayed away, with the film earning only $3.2 million against its $5.3 million budget. The failure was particularly painful for MGM, which had counted on this sure thing to help offset losses from their riskier productions. In a tragic postscript, the real Singing Nun, Janine Deckers, later sued the filmmakers for royalties and eventually passed away in 1985, after years of financial troubles. What's New Pussycat represented Woody Allen's first produced screenplay and one of the more surprising entries on this list. While the film is often remembered today as a success due to its cultural impact, its financial reality was far more complicated. The production was chaotic, with original director Clive Donner being partially replaced by Richard Talmadge after falling behind schedule. The film's stars, Peter Sellers and Peter O'Toole, reportedly clashed frequently, with Sellers' demanding behavior causing delays. Woody Allen's original screenplay was repeatedly altered during production, much to his frustration. By the time filming concluded, the budget had ballooned to $6 million, a massive sum for a comedy in 1966. While What's New Pussycat did earn $12.5 million at the worldwide box office, seemingly a solid return, its high production and marketing costs, combined with unfavorable distribution deals, meant United Artists saw relatively little profit. The studio had expected a blockbuster given the talent involved and considered its performance disappointing. The Tom Jones title song became a hit, ironically earning more in royalties than many investors saw from the film itself. Our final casualty of 1966 was A Fine Madness, starring Sean Connery as a rebellious poet with writer's block. Warner Bros. Had high hopes that this film would establish Connery beyond his James Bond persona, proving he could carry a project without relying on 007's familiarity. The production was challenging from the beginning. Director Irvin Kershner clashed with the studio over the film's tone, pushing for a darker, more satirical approach than executives were comfortable with. Connery, eager to break free from typecasting, threw himself into the role of the self-destructive poet. But audiences and critics were confused by seeing their suave secret agent transformed into an erratic, problematic character. Released to mixed reviews, A Fine Madness earned only $1.5 million against a $3 million budget. Connery wouldn't successfully break from the Bond image until years later, and the film became yet another statistic in 1966's unprecedented roster of failures. Warner Bros. Executives were left wondering if audiences would accept Connery as anything other than James Bond, a question that wouldn't be definitively answered until the 1970s. The devastating box office results of 1966 weren't just a bad year. They represented the end of old Hollywood. The cumulative losses were so severe that major studios, including 20th Century Fox and MGM, found themselves in genuine danger of bankruptcy. Fox was forced to sell large portions of its backlot, now Century City in Los Angeles, simply to stay afloat. What few people realize is how directly these failures led to the industry revolution that followed. The studio heads who had approved these disasters were almost all replaced or forced to resign. In their place came a younger generation of executives who recognized that the old formulas weren't working anymore. Their solution? Take chances on young directors with fresh ideas. This changing of the guard directly enabled the new Hollywood era that would emerge over the next few years, with breakout films like Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, and Easy Rider transforming cinema. The massive financial holes created in 1966 forced studios to gamble on these cheaper, youth-oriented productions because they could no longer afford the bloated spectacles that had just failed so spectacularly. Perhaps the most ironic legacy of 1966's box office disasters is that several of these films were later reassessed as ahead of their time. Fantastic Voyage influenced generations of sci-fi filmmakers. Modesty Blaise became a cult classic for its visual style. Even the ridiculed Casino Royale found fans who appreciated its chaotic absurdity. Yet this critical reevaluation came too late for the executives who lost their jobs and the studios that nearly lost everything. The box office disasters of 1966 remain a pivotal moment in Hollywood history, the year that broke the old system and inadvertently created the conditions for a revolutionary new one. Next time you enjoy a challenging, director-driven film from the 1970s, remember that you might have 1966's magnificent failures to thank for making it possible. The industry's darkest hour ultimately led to one of its most creative and influential eras, proof that in Hollywood, even catastrophic failure can sometimes change the world.